welcome back to episode 25 of the Stadium Showdown. I'm your host, Jeff Slauson. We're giving you an in-depth look, of course, at the future home of the Cleveland Browns. This week, for the first time, we heard from Cleveland Hopkins International Airport in the essential debate between Haslam Sports Group and the Browns and ODOT and, of course, the airport. For those that need a quick reminder here, I know we've talked about it quite a bit, but many may not know the full story here. The application, the permit to the FAA from the Haslams, basically to allow the stadium to be 50 feet over federal regulations, was denied. Not by the FAA, by ODOT. Essentially how this works is they file that paperwork through the FAA. At the time that the FAA receives that paperwork, they then send a copy to the local Department of Transportation. In this case, that of course is ODOT. So ODOT gets a copy of the report. ODOT then refers to the local agency that is responsible for the zoning. In this case, it's the City of Cleveland and Cleveland Hopkins International Airport. And according to Cleveland Hopkins International Airport and ODOT, they deemed that the 50 feet above the federal limit of 150 feet was too high. So they denied the permit request. Now, it's not something to kind of shy away from here. The City of Cleveland very much so does not want the stadium moved. They don't want it built in Brook Park. So if they have the ability to decline a permit, of course they're going to take it. However, that's not the reason why Cleveland Hopkins International Airport says they denied that application. And in kind of a strange situation, they invited Dan DeRose along with other reporters to the airport for a no cameras, no recording informational session. Dan's going to bring this up, but I've rarely heard of this happening with something this high profile and this public. Dan's going to break this down, exactly what he learned at that session and also what he did not learn. But again, we weren't allowed cameras. We weren't allowed recording devices. The only person that could really tell us the information is Dan DeRose, and here he is.
This was quite frankly a very bizarre meeting. This just doesn't happen really in our industry. This is a city-run airport. He is a city employee, and members of the media were invited to what was called an informational meeting. We were not allowed to take cameras in. We were not allowed to record the conversation, and we were told it would last just 30 minutes. With that being said, the director of the airport, his title is Director of Port Control, Bryant Francis, basically said that safety and the operation of the airport is their top concern. Here is the airport, and he pointed out that the regulations say there is a force field around the property of the airport. Now, this is just a rough drawing, but that the regulations say anything within inside this force field cannot be above 150 feet high. Now, the FAA looked at the proposed Brown Stadium, roughly right here, and found out it was going to be 58 feet too high. As soon as the director of the airport heard that, that's when he went to ODOT and said, we want you to deny the permit because anything that impacts the operation of the airport, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, it supports jobs, it supports small businesses, anything that could impact it, he doesn't want it to happen. Now, we asked the director of the airport, well, is it about a safety issue of flights coming in this way, flights coming in this way? Is it a sightline problem? And he said, look, I'm not an expert, I'm not a pilot. He is simply worried about anything that could impact the operations. He was also asked, the Browns have been reporting there are 31 other structures inside this force field, and they can be billboards, antennas, buildings, hotels, anything that is above that 150-foot barrier. He said he didn't know about any of those other 31 because he is only concerned about what's being pitched since he has been the director for the last 2.5 years. I asked him flat out, shouldn't you know about the other 31 that are above that threshold if you're so worried about the safety and the operations of the airport? And he said he wasn't going to answer that.
So it's this runway right here. This runway is runway 28. If this is one that you're slightly unfamiliar with, there's a reason for that. I decided to look through exactly how much it is used because this is the site, right? So this is the whole Brook Park site where the stadium would go. It's basically like right here. So where you would go is kind of above where the stadium would be. It's not a direct sight line. Also, runway 28 is very rarely used. How do I know that? Well, let's get into that in just 1 second here, because the airport releases a report every quarter. It is their noise compatibility report. Essentially, it's to determine how often which runways are used and how much it impacts the rest of the community. I compiled a report from each quarter over the last year, so quarter 3 and 4 of last year, and then of course 1st and 2nd of this year. Still don't have Q3 of this current year. From that, one thing that was very interesting here that I was able to see, the airport pretty much outlines what we are all believing as far as what the runway is. I'm going to just circle this here. Runway 10 through 28, or 10 and 28. 10's the one on the other side that takes those that are coming in from that other side. Not included on this graph, so it's not even on the graph showing all of the runway usage, is Cleveland's crosswind runway. So essentially, if the winds are really dangerous or not really working out, they will use that runway. How often is that? They say it is used in less than 1% of all operations. And according to the numbers that I was able to compile, it is far, far less than 1%. So yeah, even smaller than you potentially think. So let's go through this here. This is the first one we're going to talk about. This one is Q3 of last year. I know it's a little hard to see. I'll be able to show it to you. So 28 is on the bottom on this portion right here. That entire quarter, only 9 total arrivals. That accounted for 0.06% of all arrivals. I want to also be clear, no departures. Cleveland Hopkins Airport never has a departure from this runway right here. So 0.06 of all. That is 9 out of more than 1,000 flights just in that runway. So as of right now, not necessarily the largest amount. Let's go to the next quarter. That one had a whopping 0.13% of all departures. They had 16 during the day. They had 1 at night, 17 total departures. Again, that was Q4 of last year. So now you're catching my drift here. You're understanding exactly where I'm going with this. Next one here. This is Q1 of this year. In total, only 15. That accounted for 0.11%. Let's get the percent in there of all takeoffs, or arrivals, excuse me. You're seeing what we're showing you. Very small percentage. I mean, this is 15. The next closest runway that would have the lowest one had 1,100. Just to show you in perspective here. All right, the last one here, this is in the most recent quarter, right? So this is the last couple of months leading into Q3. Again, we do not have the Q3 numbers. 25 total. This accounted for 0.17% of all flights. So when you compile all of the data, where does that get us? So I compiled it all. In total, 66 out of 55,000 flights went out of this runway. Again, the runway that is the most concern in this situation. The runway that, according to ODOT and according to Cleveland Hopkins Airport, would have issues with the height restrictions. 66 flights in total. That percentage is 0.12% of all flights. That is what this is over. 0.12% of all flights, and that one runway. So potentially there is a solution in trying to make it work. But according to what Dan heard from Cleveland Hopkins International Airport, they don't seem very interested in finding that solution. It's basically move the stadium or don't have the stadium, because they say it is incredibly problematic. I want to show one more time that map that I had earlier. It's going to take me a second just to cycle back, but I think it's important to show you kind of where that runway is compared to where the actual stadium would be. Here we go. So again, this is the runway. This is runway 28. That's runway 10 right there. Again, that's only going to be ones coming in from this way. The stadium site, so this is that Ford plant, but that's not leaving. The stadium site is going to be kind of diagonal like this. There's going to be some parking here, some parking here, some parking here, and some parking here. That's not necessarily in the site path of it. In addition to that, according to the FAA, there is some sort of a standing thing that is above the threshold in like this zone-ish. That's okay. Something that Brook Park hit on, which you're going to be hearing about in the next block, it's also okay apparently for the construction equipment. That's not the problem, it's the site. So a lot of confusion in this situation. Now I do want to stress here, I did reach out to the Cleveland Browns multiple times for an interview with their aviation lawyer, and as of this show airing, they have denied that request, or at least not been able to make time for it. Obviously, we're hoping to have that conversation in the next couple of weeks, because we're incredibly curious to hear what they feel versus obviously what Cleveland Hopkins had to feel about it. Then coming up in the next break, I mentioned it, Brook Park. How do they feel about this whole thing? In their most previous meetings, the Aviation Commission didn't really say anything. They were very clear about their thought process. Again, that coming up. Welcome back. Brook Park has been very forward-thinking when it comes to the stadium and all of the drama surrounding the FAA. They haven't really been specific on what has been going on with their interactions. That is until this week. So I'm going to play you two parts of the meeting. The first one is from the one that heads the Aviation Commission within Brook Park. He very much so disagrees with what has been going on. I mentioned in the previous block, he really points to the fact that the FAA and ODOT agreed to the construction equipment, which is obviously higher than the stadium. But then they have a problem with the stadium, and that's where he has a real sticking point with this. Let's hear from him.
I was going to bring it up at the last meeting. Decided to wait a few weeks to see how things shook out. But obviously, in regard to aviation, we've heard all about potential issues with the height of a proposed stadium in our city. It's my understanding that the developers continue to work with ODOT and relevant stakeholders to resolve any issues. I'm anxious to see that work move along. Found out today that there actually is no deadline on what's going on because it wasn't sent certified. But I just want to point out that from where I sit, ODOT approved multiple 370-foot cranes and had 11 FAA determinations of no hazard, but yet somehow a 220-foot building was deemed as problematic. So I sincerely hope that nobody would be so callous to play politics with air safety. It's hard to imagine a scenario with something like air safety. You can put that cat back in the bag, but air safety is not a playground for misrepresenting facts, in my opinion. It only creates fertile ground for disinformation and speculation. And it really does a disservice to all the hard work of the people that are tasked with keeping our skies safe. So with that concludes my report.
Mayor Orcutt, the mayor of Brook Park, is in agreement with that. But for him, he's not really dwelling on it. He's stressing the Haslams are going to figure this out. They are the ones handling it. It's basically an argument between them and between ODOT. So Brook Park doesn't need to be concerned. They're looking ahead, whether it's the permit process or whatever, essentially. They are looking ahead on this. They're not really focusing on the airport drama. Here's what he had to say at the meeting.
Browns update. As the one report in the Aviation Committee, the developers with Haslam Sports Group at the 176 acres are working with the appropriate agencies to be able to correct any issues with the height restrictions. So that's what we have for that. Furthermore, as you all know, we just passed and rezoned 176 acres to include not just industrial, but U1, U2, U3, U4, and now U6 as well, on top of the U5 industrial. We are working on multiple things. We are obviously working on the preliminary development plan that will have to come before Planning Commission and Council. From there, we'll need approval of the final development plan, and also we are working on a development agreement. So a lot of things that are still moving and going into action behind the scenes. So everybody knows we're really pushing forward with this project to be able to get a shovel in the ground. And again, I want to thank all parties involved with their professionalism and obviously for the opportunity for us to be a part of this project. It's great.
Now, that doesn't mean everything is just going to be roses once we figure out the airport situation. There's still a couple of lawsuits. In fact, there's a new one that just popped up. I'm going to be breaking that down after a short break. Now, before the Browns can officially start construction on anything, they need to figure out the lawsuit situation. We've talked about the multiple lawsuits that we have known about. That is, until this week, when former Cleveland Mayor Dennis Kucinich filed a lawsuit not only against the Browns, but the city of Cleveland as well. Now, let me take you back. We've been talking about the Modell Law. Kucinich was the architect behind the Modell Law. So for him, he feels the city of Cleveland did not argue it well enough to be able to enforce it. Going to pull up a couple of bullet points here about this specific lawsuit. So essentially, what Kucinich is saying is that the city is failing to properly argue its case to enforce the Modell Law, also saying that the Browns need to abide by it. According to the filing, Kucinich says that the purpose of the Modell Law was to avoid a team from being blindsided by a team's move. That's what he believes happened in this case. He even used the term, quote unquote, lip service on how the city's attorneys have handled the law in their lawsuit against the Browns. He's asking that a judge enforce the Modell Law and including forcing owners Jimmy and Dee Haslam to put the team up for sale. So not only is he going against the Browns here and saying you still have to put the team up for sale to abide by the Modell Law, he's calling out the city, saying you did not effectively try and use the Modell Law to keep the Browns downtown. And again, quote unquote, lip service is what he used. Wild lawsuit, but one that still would need to be figured out before the Browns would potentially fulfill that. Former Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown, who recently announced he would be running again, weighed in on the potential Browns move. He spoke with our Brittany Weir on Labor Day, and here's what he had to say.
Well, we're seeing the same thing. In Washington, billionaires get a huge tax cut. In Ohio, the billionaire owner from Tennessee of the Cleveland Browns is getting $600 million from taxpayers. And after the governor signed the bill, the billionaire owner from Tennessee bought a $25 million house in Florida. That's just not right. Forgetting that he's an owner that can't put a winning team on the field. I grew up in Northeast Ohio. I watched the Browns, went to a couple games as a kid, as a little kid, but that's just not right.
And of course, if you'd like to watch any of our previous coverage of the Stadium Showdown, go ahead, scan the QR code on your screen right now. All 25, yes, 25 episodes available at our website, cleveland19.com. And thank you so much for watching this latest episode of the Stadium Showdown. 250 is how I like to be saying this. Very proud of the progress on this show and very thankful for all of you at home for watching. We, of course, will have many more episodes to come. For now, I'm Jeff Slauson with 19 News. As always, thank you so much for watching. We will see you next week.